All right, let's talk about tone. So, as a professional saxophonist in New York City, I've been asked countless times, how do I get my tone? How did I get my tone to sound so unique? And also just many, many compliments on my saxophone tone. And I just wanted to stress that this video is sort of an educational video, but also sort of a testimonial, anecdotal. I don't really know what to call this video because I'm not gonna teach you how to get a good sound, but rather I'm going to talk to you about how I got a good sound. Because here's the thing, when it comes to learning your instrument and music education, one size doesn't fit all. And so some people have learned other methods and some people have benefited from methods that maybe nobody else uses. So without further ado, I just want to talk about this real quick. Now, I don't mean to say this to toot my own horn, but I'm just being real. There have been many people over the past few years, ever since I moved to New York City, who have specifically been complimenting me on how I've gotten such a unique tone, how I've gotten my own sound, because a lot of saxophonists specifically are always searching for their own sound. Truthfully, and this isn't a diss, this is just what I've seen, there are many saxophonists who are so inspired by their heroes that they end up sounding like them. Like I've heard people who sound just like John Coltrane, just like even, Walter Smith III, who is a bit, I guess, newer compared to, people like Coltrane, even though he's still OG, or Mike Brecker and all these people. And that just comes from imitation. Sometimes you get so caught up into a musician that you get obsessed with them and you practice how they played and you end up sounding like them. And that leads me to the first topic, imitation. So the way I got a professional sound on saxophone is through imitation. And by imitation, I mean going to the saxophonists that you look up to, listening to their albums and listening even to their improvisation and trying to copy it and sound like it and stick some of their language into your pocket so that you can, for lack of a better term, regurgitate it when it comes to a performance setting. So I spent a lot of time in my development on John Coltrane. I also spent a lot of time with Joe Henderson, another great saxophonist, a lot of time with Kurt Whalum because I'm from Memphis and Kurt Whalum is one of my favorite saxophonists when it comes to soul. Actually, he is my favorite saxophonist when it comes to soul. And believe it or not, singers, because I play a lot of R&B music, a lot of R&B covers. I play in pop bands and cover bands. And I think the most effective way for me to get a soulful sound was to channel what I grew up with, which was a lot of soul singers in the church. And I've listened to that music, and I've also listened to a lot of just popular R&B music and tried to copy the singers. When I learn a song, like for instance, when I learn a Michael Jackson song, I try to imitate how he used vibrato, how he phrased, how he articulated his words, and all the notes and runs that these people did. And so when you do a lot of imitation of professional saxophonists or professional musicians, you start to sound like a professional saxophonist or a professional musician. Now, me personally, I think the reason why I got a such unique tone is because I was never obsessed with sounding like somebody. Like I said, I spent a lot of time on John Coltrane, but that's because I was trying to capture what made Coltrane Coltrane, and then I moved on and I spent a lot of time on people like Gene Emmons, Joe Henderson, Grover Washington Jr., Jimmy Forrest, Ben Webster especially, Sonny Stitt. I spent so much time picking up the language and picking up the characteristics of all these different saxophonists that we regard as the best people. While I spent a lot of time on each individual saxophonist, my intent with capturing how they sound was never to make their sound my sound, but rather to understand how they played music in such the way that they did. And so I think a way that I got that unique sound is by hearing all that and just mixing it all together. And also Greg Tardy too. I will say for the people who know Greg Tardy, who was my teacher, there are a lot of people who are like, man, I can hear some Greg Tardy in your playing. And that's because I spent 3.5 years learning under him. So obviously I'm going to pick up that stuff too. And Greg Tardy has a pretty unique sound. I've never heard anybody who sounds even close to Greg Tardy. So I think capturing his sound and also a mix of all the other people who I've learned from through their recordings, it's caused me to make my own melting pot of a saxophone sound that doesn't sound like most other people's. So the second part, practice. This is pretty obvious, but I just want to talk about this because when I was coming up, and even now, I spent a lot of time practicing just getting good at the instrument, right? In order to have a professional sound, you have to put in the work to become a professional. I mean, that makes sense. I used to practice back when I was in school and when I was younger, 4 to 6 hours a day. I don't have that much time these days to do 4 to 6 hours, but when I do practice these days, it'll be 1 to 2 hours. And lately, I've been trying to bump that up because I haven't been as satisfied with how I'm sounding lately. That's just a personal thing. But here's why practicing is important. The more time you spend on your instrument, the more natural playing your instrument and comfortable playing your instrument becomes. When you're comfortable playing your instrument, the things that you want to come out will come out very easily. The techniques that you want to get under your belt will get under your belt easy. The more you practice, the more you practice, the faster you learn. A lot of practice for me has been taking solos of these great saxophonists and learning them by ear, learning how they articulate. This goes back to my last point, which was imitation. But here's the thing. The more that I've done that, the more I've learned these solos by ear, the faster I've been able to learn these solos. The first time I ever learned a solo by ear, it took me a long time. But by the third, fourth year of doing it, I could learn a solo in a couple hours. I could learn a solo in 1 hour because you get really used to hearing exactly what somebody's playing and projecting it on your instrument because you have become comfortable with your instrument by practicing it all the time. So the second way that I've gotten my own unique professional sound is practicing a lot. So the third thing, and this is very important, fundamentals, because especially if you're a beginner, taking your horn out of the case and just playing it isn't really that productive if you want to grow. I used to practice scales like crazy, man. I'd practice scales all 12 major, minor, and so on and so forth. But I'd also practice all of the different scale modes. And if you want to know what scale modes are, you can look those up. For the sake of this video, I don't have time to explain those. But I would be practicing Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, all of these in all the keys, including the diminished scales, including synthetic scales, which synthetic scales are scales that don't come out of the mode of a major or minor scale. Scales that are made to kind of cover a specific sound on specific chord changes. I'd practice all the scales and not only all the keys, but I also practice them 3 octaves on my horn. And saxophone has a 2.5 octave range. So in order to get real comfortable on my horn, I would play it 3 octaves, meaning that I would be using what's called altissimo notes, high notes that aren't on the saxophone, but you kind of figure out ways to play them anyway. And long tones. I spent a lot of time doing long tones, holding a note for a very long time to get it at an equal temperament, and then going to the next note and doing the same thing, because that gets your lips comfortable with the horn without getting tired. And it also, here's the biggest thing that fundamentals does. In order to get a really good tone, you have to have a very consistent, stable setup. Your lips can't be quivering from being too tired. Your oral cavity has to stay consistent, all of these. Doing all these fundamentals and hammering them away makes it very natural for you to be able to keep your same exact setup. And once you have your same exact setup, once your lips and so on and so forth are comfortable, you can facilitate being able to make the tone you want. You're going to be able to play what you want to hear, because ultimately a way to know that you're good at what you do is that you're able to play what you want to hear. Fundamentals is important. You can't skip that. And they relate to everything. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've sight read something and I've seen a very long, fast 16th note run. And my sight reading isn't the best because truthfully, I don't read that much on gigs. But I was able to identify that run was in the F sharp major scale. So rather than just reading it note by note, I just played, the F sharp major scale until and wound up on the ending note. Playing your scales, playing all these relates directly to the music that you're trying to learn. Now, number 4, here's a bonus point. Because like I said, this video is talking about how I got my tone. Playing outside. I know isn't something that everybody does or can do, so that's why it's a bonus. But when I first moved to New York City, I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any gigs or whatnot. So I was making a living by playing on the street every single day. And I've made a lot of connections from that, and it's ultimately got me to where I am now, which is great. But one thing I remember stuck with me because I was having this conversation with a friend of mine named Jason. But we were talking about how I was always, hustling, playing out on the street. And he was like, yeah, playing outside is brutal because there's no reverb outside. You have to make your own reverb. And that stuck with me. But it's kind of a way to show that playing outside, the acoustics are terrible playing outside, man. Like if you think you sound wonderful when you're playing inside your room or in an auditorium with all this echo and reverb, just go outside. It'll humble you because playing outside, there's nothing for the sound to bounce off of, and there's nothing that's curing the sound, so it's not going to sound that good unless you're really, really solid. And because I played on the street for years, I found a way to really make my sound fit outside. Here's the thing. If you sound good outside, bro, you're going to sound good anywhere. Truthfully, I played outside. I played on the street for years, and I didn't even realize that it was improving my tone. But when I started playing on the street versus a couple years later after playing on the street, I've noticed my tone has changed immensely, and I've noticed that outside it has changed immensely. I got better at projecting outside. I got better at making it sound like almost a recording, right? And I never really heard that being used as a method to get good at making a great tone in your instrument. But I kind of accidentally stumbled upon it, and it has done wonders for me. Like I do not regret playing on the street at all. I mean, also because it kept me from being homeless, but also like it's playing outside has really improved my tone. So yeah, this is how I've gotten the sound that I have today. And I'm constantly trying to practice and continue to maintain it and make it even better. So I hope you got a lot of information, a lot of education from this video. Know that this is not a teaching video, but more so a testimonial type video. If you have any concepts that you would like to share to improve people's tone, I know that there are a lot of upcoming saxophonists who subscribe to me and follow me, and they would love to see that information. Make a comment below. If there are any ways that you improved your tone that I didn't discuss here, comments about it. Let's have a little discussion. It's likely that the way that I developed my tone wasn't the same as you developing your tone. So let's talk about it. If you want any more videos like this too, let me know. I'm out of here. Peace.